The axe bit deep into the pine trunk with a satisfying thunk, and Xavier Everhart paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, despite the autumn chills settling over his mountain. He had inherited this land from his grandfather 3 years ago, and in that time he had cleared enough timber to sell, built a sturdy cabin, and carved out a life of solitude that suited him just fine after his years serving in the border wars. The mountain was his, legally purchased and paid for with his military pension and every coin he had saved, stretching across 500 acres of dense forest and rocky slopes. He knew every stream, every deer path, every stand of good timber, or so he thought. The smoke caught his attention first, a thin gray line rising from the eastern slope where the terrain grew too steep and rocky for decent logging. Xavier set down his axe and reached for the hunting bow he always kept nearby. Squatters were rare this far from any settlement, but not unheard of. Bandits sometimes used the remote mountains as hideouts. He moved through the forest with the practiced silence of a former scout, following the smoke to its source. What he found made him freeze behind a thick oak, his hand tightening on his bow. The camp sprawled across a natural clearing sheltered by an overhang of rock, perhaps 24 rough shelters made of pine branches and salvaged canvas. But it was the inhabitants that made his breath catch. Orcs, at least 30 of them, maybe more. He could see women tending cooking fires, children playing with sticks near the edge of the camp, and a handful of warriors sharpening weapons or repairing leather armor. They looked worn, their clothes patched and threadbare, their shelters hastily constructed. This was not a war band. This was something else entirely. Xavier considered his options. He could retreat to his cabin, gather his few valuable possessions, and ride to the nearest town to report an orc encampment. The garrison would come with soldiers and drive them off or worse, but something made him hesitate. The children's laughter, perhaps, or the way one of the orc women held an infant close while stirring a pot over the fire. These were not raiders preparing for battle. These were refugees. Before he could decide, a twig snapped under his boot. The sound was soft, but every orc head in the camp swiveled toward his hiding spot. The warriors reached for their weapons with frightening speed, and Xavier found himself surrounded by 4 orc fighters before he could even raise his bow. Hands seized his arms, and his weapons were taken as he was marched into the center of the camp. The orcs gathered around him in a wary circle, and Xavier kept his hands visible and non-threatening. He had fought orcs in the war, knew their strength and ferocity, but he had also learned that they were not mindless monsters. They were people, with families and customs and reasons for what they did. The crowd parted, and a figure stepped forward that made Xavier's prepared words die in his throat. She was tall for an orc woman, though still shorter than his 6 feet, with deep green skin marked with old scars along her muscular arms. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and small tusks curved up from her lower jaw. She wore leather armor that had seen better days, and her amber eyes studied him with an intelligence that made him straighten instinctively. She was young, perhaps his own age of 26, and she carried herself with unmistakable authority. "You are the first human we have seen on this mountain," she said, her voice deep and measured. "We have been here for 3 weeks. We thought no one owned this land." Xavier found his voice, keeping his tone calm and level. "I am Xavier Everhart. I own this mountain, 500 acres purchased legal and proper. I have the deed at my cabin." The orc woman's expression tightened, but she nodded slowly. "I am Thraza, daughter of Karg, leader of what remains of the Stone Peak clan. We fled from the purge in the lowlands. The human settlements there decided all orcs were enemies, regardless of whether we had raised weapons against them. They burned our village. We lost many, Her voice remained steady, but Xavier saw the grief in her eyes. "We have been traveling for 2 months, seeking somewhere remote enough to survive the winter. We found this clearing and saw no signs of habitation. We did not know." Xavier looked around the camp again, seeing it differently now, the children watching him with wide, fearful eyes. The elderly orcs huddled near fires, wrapped in thin blankets, the exhaustion in every face. "How many are you?" 34, Thraza said. 16 warriors, 8 elders, 10 women and children who cannot fight." She raised her chin, meeting his eyes directly. "If you mean to report us to your human soldiers, I ask only that you give us 2 days to pack and move on. Some of our elders are ill. The journey will be hard on them, but we will not fight you for your land. We did not come here to make war." Xavier ran a hand through his brown hair, his mind racing. 2 days would not be enough for them to find another shelter before the mountain snows came. He had seen orc children frozen on roadsides during the war, refugees from burned villages with nowhere to go. The memory had haunted him more than any battle. "Where will you go?" Thraza's jaw tightened. "North, perhaps. Deeper into the mountains, we will find somewhere." "You will die," Xavier said bluntly. "The deep mountains are unforgiving and winter comes early at higher elevations. If your elders are already sick, they will not survive another month of travel and exposure." "Then we die," Thraza said with fierce pride. "But we die free, not slaughtered like animals by humans who see only monsters when they look at us." Xavier made a decision that he knew might be the stupidest of his life, or possibly the best. "This clearing is on the eastern edge of my land. It is not good for timber too rocky and steep. I do not use it for anything." He saw hope flicker in several faces and quickly held up a hand. "But if you stay, there will be conditions. No raiding, no stealing, no causing trouble with any travelers or traders who come through. You keep to this side of the mountain. My cabin is on the western slope. We stay out of each other's way. Come spring, we talk again about more permanent arrangements." Thraza stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue. "You would let us stay. Why?" "Because I have seen enough death," Xavier said quietly. "Because those children deserve a chance to survive the winter. And because this mountain is big enough for all of us if we are careful and respectful." He met her amber eyes steadily. "I am not your enemy, Thraza of the Stone Peak clan. I am just a man trying to make a life in peace, same as you." For a long moment, silence held the clearing. Then Thraza inclined her head in a gesture of respect that seemed to cost her something. "We accept your terms, Xavier Everhart. You have my word and the word of my clan. We will not betray your trust." Xavier nodded and retrieved his bow and axe from the warrior who had taken them. As he turned to leave, Thraza called after him. "Why do you live alone on this mountain? Most humans prefer the safety of settlements." He looked back at her, and something in her direct gaze made him answer honestly. "Because after 4 years of war, I got tired of killing. I wanted somewhere quiet where I could hear myself think again, where I did not have to be afraid or make others afraid." He paused. "Seems like maybe you wanted something similar." Thraza's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, something similar." Xavier left the camp and returned to his cabin, but sleep eluded him that night. He had just sheltered a clan of orcs on his land, in direct violation of a dozen laws and social customs. If word reached the lowland settlements, he could lose his property, his reputation, possibly his freedom. But when he closed his eyes, he saw those orc children's faces and knew he had made the only choice he could live with. The next weeks passed in wary coexistence. Xavier kept to his logging on the western and northern slopes, and the orcs remained in their eastern clearing. But it was impossible to avoid all contact on a mountain they now shared. He encountered orc hunters tracking deer, and they gave him respectful nods before moving on. He found orc children gathering mushrooms and berries, always with an adult watching nearby. Once he came across Thraza herself at the stream that divided their territories, filling water skins. "Your elders," Xavier said, surprising himself with the question. "You said they were ill. Do they still struggle?" Thraza looked up, water dripping from the skins. "Two have fevers that will not break. Our healer does what she can, but we lost many of our medicinal supplies when we fled. The plants here are unfamiliar to us." Xavier thought of the well-stocked medicine chest in his cabin, gifts from the local healer woman who visited his mountain twice a year to gather herbs. Fevers from infection or from lung sickness, we believe. They cough blood at night. He made a decision. Wait here. He returned to his cabin and gathered what he could spare: willow bark for fever, coltsfoot and horehound for coughs, honey to soothe inflamed throats. When he brought the supplies back to the stream, Thraza stared at the bundle as if it were made of gold. "I cannot pay you for this," she said, her voice rough. "I did not ask you to pay. Just keep your elders alive through the winter. That is payment enough." Xavier set the bundle on a flat rock between them and turned to go. "Xavier." Thraza's voice stopped him. When he looked back, she was studying him with those keen amber eyes. "You are not like the other humans I have known. Maybe you have not known the right humans. Maybe." Something that might have been a smile tugged at her mouth, softening the fierce lines of her face. "Thank you, truly." The first snow came in late October, a light dusting that melted by noon but promised heavier storms to come. Xavier was splitting logs behind his cabin when he heard the sound of running feet. He turned to see an orc boy, no more than 12, racing toward him with panic in his eyes. "Please, please, you must help," the boy gasped in heavily accented common tongue. "There is accident. Rock fell. Thraza is trapped." Xavier did not hesitate. He grabbed a coil of rope, a pry bar, and his medical supplies and followed the boy at a run back toward the eastern clearing. They diverted north, into a rocky area where several orcs were digging frantically at a pile of rubble. Xavier pushed through to see Thraza pinned from the waist down under a massive boulder, her face gray with pain. Two warriors were trying to lever the rock with branches, but the wood kept snapping. "Stop," Xavier commanded, assessing the situation with the quick eye of someone who had worked construction during his youth. "You are destabilizing the wrong side. You will bring more rocks down on her." He positioned his steel pry bar at a different angle and braced himself. "When I lift, you pull her out, fast. I cannot hold this long." He threw his weight and strength against the bar, muscles screaming as the boulder shifted minutely. The orc warriors seized Thraza under her arms and dragged her free just as Xavier's strength gave out and the boulder crashed back down. He fell to his knees, gasping, while the orcs surrounded their leader. Thraza's breathing was labored and shallow, and Xavier saw blood seeping through her leather armor at her left side. "Bring her to my cabin," he ordered. "It is closer than your camp, and I have better supplies there. Move carefully but quickly." The orcs fashioned a stretcher from branches and cloaks, and Xavier led them at a rapid pace to his cabin. He cleared his workbench and had them lay Thraza there, then sent all but one warrior outside. The orc who remained was a tall male with ritual scars on his face, who introduced himself as Thraza's second in command, Ragath. "I was a field medic in the wars," Xavier said as he carefully cut away Thraza's armor. "I have seen worse injuries than this." That was not entirely true. Her ribs were clearly broken, possibly her hip as well, and she was bleeding internally if the swelling of her abdomen meant what he thought it did. But he kept his voice confident as he worked, cleaning wounds, binding ribs and preparing a strong tincture of poppy for the pain. Thrasa's eyes fluttered open as he worked, and she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "My clan. If I die, tell Ragath to lead them. Tell them to stay here if you still allow it. They need this shelter." "You are not going to die," Xavier said firmly, though her hand was cold and her pulse was thready. "But you are going to be here for a while healing. Your people can camp near my cabin if it makes you feel better about being away from them. There is space, and it will be easier for me to tend you." Over the next days, the Stone Peak clan moved their camp to the area surrounding Xavier's cabin, which suddenly seemed very small with 34 orcs as neighbors. But they were respectful and quiet, and several offered to help with chores as payment for Xavier's care of their leader. He accepted, and found himself working alongside orcs to gather firewood, repair shelters, and hunt game for the winter stores. Thrasa remained in his cabin, confined to his bed while her bones knitted and her internal bleeding slowly resolved. Xavier slept on the floor by the fire and spent his days either working outside or sitting with Thrasa, changing bandages and making sure she ate. She was a difficult patient, restless and frustrated by her helplessness. "I should be with my people," she growled on the 5th day, trying to sit up and immediately gasping with pain. "Your people are fine," Xavier said, firmly pressing her back down. "Ragath is handling everything. What they need is for their leader to heal properly, not tear open half-healed wounds trying to be a hero. You do not understand. A leader who cannot protect the clan is no leader at all." "That is stupid," Xavier said bluntly. "You got hurt protecting your people. You were checking that overhang to make sure it was stable enough for a winter shelter. That boy who came to get me told me everything. You are a good leader, Thrasa. Good enough to know when to let others carry the burden for a while." She turned her face away, but not before he saw the shine of tears in her eyes. "I thought we would be safe here. I thought we had finally found somewhere the world would leave us in peace. And I nearly got myself killed in a stupid accident." Xavier pulled a chair closer to the bed, sitting so he could see her face. "You are safe here. Accidents happen, especially when people are exhausted and traumatized and trying to survive. But you did find a safe place, Thrasa. I give you my word that as long as I own this mountain, your clan has a home here." She looked at him then, really looked, her amber eyes searching his face. "Why? Why do you care what happens to a clan of orcs? We are nothing to you, less than nothing in the eyes of most humans." Xavier was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "In the war, I was ordered to burn an orc village. We were told it was a strategic target that they were supplying enemy fighters. When we got there, it was just families. Elders and children and farmers. They did not even have weapons to fight us with. My commander ordered us to burn it anyway." He stared at his hands, remembering. "I refused. I was stripped of rank and nearly court-martialed. They let me finish my service as a common soldier because they needed bodies, but I was marked as an orc lover and a traitor. When I got out, I took my pension and came here to get away from all of it. The hate, the killing, the refusal to see orcs as people." He met her eyes. "I care because someone has to, because the world does not get better unless people choose to be better." Thrasa was silent for a long time. Then she reached out and took his hand, her larger fingers wrapping around his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing us, for caring." Xavier felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. He looked at their joined hands, green skin against his tan, and realized he was in dangerous territory. But he did not pull away. As the days passed and Thrasa healed, they fell into an easy rhythm. Xavier would bring her breakfast and they would talk while she ate. He told her about his childhood in a small farming village, about his parents who had died of plague when he was 16, about the restless wandering that had led him to the army and eventually to this mountain. Thraza shared stories of the Stone Peak clan, of growing up among warriors and learning to fight before she could raid, of the tight-knit community that had been shattered by human fear and violence. "We were not perfect," she admitted one evening as snow fell softly outside. "Orcs can be violent and territorial. Some clans raid and make war. But the Stone Peak clan had lived in peace with the nearby human settlements for 3 generations. We traded fairly, kept our borders, even fought alongside the humans against a goblin invasion 15 years ago. And still, when the fear came, when someone decided all orcs were the enemy, none of that mattered. They burned us out like vermin." "I am sorry," Xavier said quietly. "You deserved better." "The world rarely gives anyone what they deserve," Thraza said with a bitter smile. "It gives what it gives, and we survive or we do not. Maybe, but maybe we can make a small piece of the world better. Here on this mountain, your people and me living in peace, proving it can be done." Thraza looked at him with something tender and fragile in her expression. "You are an idealist, Xavier Everhart. Someone has to be." This time her smile was genuine, softening her fierce features. Xavier felt his heart skip, and realized with a start that he was developing feelings for this orc woman who slept in his bed and shared his meals and looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. It was foolish and dangerous and completely inappropriate given their circumstances. He was supposed to be her healer and the owner of the land where her clan sheltered. Romance was a complication neither of them needed. But when Thraza fell asleep that night and Xavier pulled the blanket up over her shoulders, letting his hand linger perhaps a moment too long, he knew he was lying to himself. It was already too late to avoid the complication. His heart had already chosen. Thraza was able to walk with assistance by the end of the 2nd week, and by the 3rd, she was moving around the cabin on her own, though still tender and careful. The first time she stepped outside to address her clan, they gathered around her with evident relief and joy, and Xavier saw the tears in more than one warrior's eyes. Thraza was deeply loved by her people, and seeing their devotion to her only made Xavier's own feelings grow stronger. She began spending time outside each day, sitting with her people, settling disputes, and planning for the winter. But she still returned to Xavier's cabin each night, claiming that the warmth helped her healing ribs, though they both knew she could have rested in any of the camp shelters. Xavier did not question it. He was not ready for her to leave yet. One evening as they sat by the fire, Thraza mending a torn shirt and Xavier sharpening his axe, she spoke without looking up from her work. "Ragath asked me today when I would return to sleeping in the camp. He says it looks strange, the leader staying in the human's cabin when I am well enough to walk around." Xavier's hand stilled on the whetstone. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to mind his own business." She looked up then, her amber eyes catching the firelight. "But he is not wrong that it looks strange. My people wonder, and I wonder too, Xavier. Why do you let me stay? You could have sent me back to the camp a week ago." He set down the axe and stone, meeting her gaze. "Because I like having you here. Because I have lived alone for 3 years, and I did not realize how lonely I was until I had someone to talk to again. Someone who sees the world the way I do." He paused, then decided to risk honesty. "Because I care about you, Thraza, more than is probably wise." She set down her mending, her expression unreadable. "I am an orc. You are human. There are laws among your people against such things, and even among orcs there would be those who would call me a traitor for lying with a human. I know. Believe me, I know all the reasons this is complicated and dangerous and possibly stupid. Xavier leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. But I also know that when I wake up and see you sleeping across the room, I feel something I have not felt in years. Hope. Happiness. Like maybe the future could be something other than lonely days cutting timber and trying not to think too much. He took a breath. If you do not feel the same, I understand. You can go back to your people and we will remain friends and allies, nothing more. But I needed you to know. Thraza stood and crossed to him, moving slowly but steadily. She cupped his face in her large, calloused hands, tilting his head up to look at her. I feel the same, you foolish, brave, wonderful human. I have felt it for days, maybe since the moment you pulled me from under that boulder. But I was afraid to speak it because I did not want to burden you with something impossible. Nothing is impossible, Xavier said, covering her hands with his own. Hard, yes. Complicated, yes, but not impossible. She leaned down and kissed him, careful of her tusks, and Xavier rose to meet her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her close. She was warm and strong and tasted faintly of the mint tea he had made her for her cough, and kissing her felt like the most natural thing in the world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thraza rested her forehead against his. "This will not be easy," she whispered. "My people will question. Your people, if they find out, will do more than question. Let them question. Let them judge. I spent too many years caring what others thought, trying to be the perfect soldier, the perfect son, the perfect citizen. It got me nothing but nightmares and loneliness. I am done living for other people's approval." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I want this, Thraza, I want you. If you will have me." "I will have you," she said, and kissed him again. They did not lie together that night, both aware that Thraza's injuries still needed care and that rushing into physical intimacy could complicate things further. But they slept in the same bed, Xavier's arm carefully draped over her waist, her back pressed against his chest, and it felt more intimate and precious than anything Xavier had ever experienced. Word spread through the camp quickly that their leader and the human were involved. Reactions were mixed. Some of the younger orcs seemed accepting or even pleased Xavier had, after all, saved their leader's life and given them all shelter. But several of the older warriors were less enthusiastic. Ragath, in particular, came to Xavier 3 days after the change became obvious. "I need to speak with you," the orc warrior said, his tone carefully neutral. "Alone." Xavier set down the leather he was working on and followed Ragath into the woods, away from the camp. When they were out of earshot, Ragath turned to face him, his expression grave. "I do not question your kindness to our clan," Ragath said. "You have been generous beyond anything we could have hoped for, but Thraza is not just a woman. She is our leader, the daughter of our former chief, the one who held us together through the purge and the flight and the desperate search for safety. If you hurt her, if you treat her as a plaything or a curiosity, if you betray her trust, you will answer to me and every warrior in this clan." Xavier met the orc's eyes steadily. "I understand your concern and I respect your loyalty to Thraza, but you should know that I have no intention of hurting her. What is between us is real, at least on my side. I care for her deeply." "Human men have said such things before," Ragath said flatly. "Human men have lain with orc women and then left them behind when it became inconvenient, or worse, turned them over to authorities to prove their loyalty to their own kind. I am not those men." Xavier's voice was hard. "I gave up my rank and my reputation in the army to avoid killing orc civilians. I gave your clan shelter when turning you in would have been easier and more profitable. And I will spend the rest of my life proving to Thraza that she can trust me, if that is what it takes." He paused. "But I also understand that words are cheap, so judge me by my actions, Ragath. Watch what I do, not what I say, and if I ever fail Thraza, you have my permission to hold me accountable." Ragath studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, I will watch. And I will hope, for Thraza's sake and for all of ours, that you are the man you claim to be." The confrontation left Xavier shaken, but also more determined. He knew that his relationship with Thraza carried weight beyond just the two of them. He was, in a sense, representing all humans to this traumatized clan, just as Thraza was representing all orcs to him. They could not afford to fail each other. The deep snows came in November, transforming the mountain into a world of white and crystal. The orc camp hunkered down for the hard months ahead, and Xavier found himself drawn further into their daily life. He taught several of the younger orcs how to read, using the few books he owned. Thraza taught him orc combat techniques, working slowly around her healing injuries. They cooked together, worked together, and fell more deeply in love with each passing day. But the outside world did not forget about them entirely. In early December, a traveling merchant who regularly brought Xavier supplies made his way up the mountain on snowshoes. Xavier met him at the cabin, trying to keep the man away from the orc camp, but the merchant's sharp eyes spotted the smoke from multiple fires. "You have guests, Xavier?" the merchant asked, his tone carefully casual. "That is unusual for you." "Just some travelers sheltering from the storms," Xavier said, counting out coins for the flour and salt and other supplies he had ordered. "They will move on come spring." The merchant, a weathered man named Harold, nodded slowly. But his eyes were calculating, and Xavier knew the man suspected something. When Harold left, Xavier watched him go with a growing sense of dread. If word reached the lowland settlements that Xavier was harboring orcs, there would be consequences. He was right to worry. 2 weeks later, a patrol of militia soldiers appeared at his cabin door. There were 6 of them, led by a Sergeant Xavier vaguely recognized from his army days. The sergeant's face was cold and professional as he read from a writ. "Xavier Everhart, you stand accused of harboring enemy combatants in violation of the Sapient Races Security Act. Witnesses report a large group of orcs camping on your property. You will submit to questioning and allow us to search your land." Xavier's mind raced. "I am harboring refugees, not combatants. They are women, children, and elders who fled persecution. They are no threat to anyone." "That is not for you to decide," the sergeant said. "Where is the orc camp?" Xavier glanced back toward the cabin, where he knew Thraza was listening. They had discussed this possibility, had made plans, but now that the moment was here, he felt sick with fear. Not for himself, but for what might happen to the Stone Peak clan. "They are on the eastern slope, but I am telling you they are peaceful. They have caused no trouble in the 3 months they have been here." "Then they will have nothing to fear from our investigation," the sergeant said. "Lead the way." Xavier had no choice. He led the soldiers through the snowy forest to the orc camp, his heart pounding. Behind him, he heard Thraza following at a distance, moving with the stealth that came naturally to orc warriors. The camp was quiet when they arrived, the orcs clearly aware of the soldiers' presence, and gathered in a defensive cluster near the largest shelter. The sergeant surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. "These are Stone Peak clan markings," he said, pointing to the symbols painted on several shelters. The Stone Peak clan was exiled from the lowlands for suspected treason and collaboration with enemy forces. "The charges were false, and you know it," Thraza's voice rang out as she stepped into the clearing. The soldiers immediately raised their weapons, but she kept her hands visible and non-threatening. "The Stone Peak clan served loyally for 3 generations. We fought and died for the borderlands. And when fear and prejudice needed a scapegoat, We were chosen because we were convenient and powerless. You are Thraza, daughter of Karg, the sergeant said, his tone shifting slightly. I fought with your father at the Battle of Broken Ridge. He saved my life. Thraza straightened, surprise flickering across her face. You knew my father. He was a good orc and a better warrior. He did not deserve what happened to your clan. The sergeant lowered his weapon, though his men kept theirs ready. But the law is the law. You are exiled, and this human has broken the law by giving you shelter. Then arrest me, Xavier said, stepping forward. I knew the law and I broke it willingly. I will face the consequences, but these orcs have done nothing wrong except survive. Let them stay here through the winter. Come spring, we can negotiate some kind of legal settlement. But if you force them out now, you are sentencing them to death, and you know it. The sergeant looked between Xavier and Thraza, then at the orc children peering fearfully from behind their parents. Xavier saw the man's jaw work as he wrestled with duty and conscience. Finally, he sighed. I did not see any orcs here, the sergeant said slowly. My report will state that we investigated a claim of enemy combatants and found only a human recluse living alone on his legal property. The witness who reported you was mistaken or exaggerating. He met Xavier's eyes. But you need to understand, Xavier, this is the only pass you get. If there is any trouble, any reason for someone to investigate again, I cannot protect you. And if word spreads beyond our local garrison, there will be officers less sympathetic than me who will come with force. I understand, Xavier said, weak with relief. Thank you, the sergeant nodded to Thraza. Your father was a hero. Remember that when you lead your people. Honor his memory by keeping them safe and out of trouble. He turned and led his men back toward the trail, leaving Xavier and the Stone Peak clan in stunned silence. When the soldiers were out of sight, Thraza turned to Xavier and pulled him into a fierce embrace. That was too close, she murmured against his shoulder. We should have been preparing to fight or flee, not trusting to the mercy of humans. Not all humans are your enemy, Xavier said, holding her tight. That sergeant proved it. He could have arrested all of us, but he chose compassion over duty. This time. But what about next time? Thraza pulled back, her amber eyes haunted. Xavier, I cannot keep putting you at risk like this. If you are arrested because of us, you lose everything. Your land, your freedom, possibly your life. That is too high a price. That is my choice to make, Xavier said firmly. And I choose you, I choose this. We just have to be more careful. But the patrol had shaken everyone. The orc camp became more vigilant, posting guards and keeping weapons closer at hand. Xavier stopped having supplies delivered and instead made trips to a different trading post further north, where he was not known and could claim to be simply a trapper passing through. The easy peace of the early winter became something more tense and watchful. In the midst of this new caution, Xavier and Thraza's relationship continued to deepen. They spent long evenings talking by the fire, sharing dreams and fears and hopes for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. Thraza told him about orc customs and traditions, about the religion of her people that honored the spirits of mountain and forest, about the rich history of clans that stretched back centuries before humans ever came to these lands. Xavier shared his own knowledge, teaching her to read more fluently, explaining human politics and culture, discussing philosophy and ethics, and the questions that had driven him to solitude. They were, in many ways, perfectly matched, both idealists who had been battered by a harsh world but still clung to the belief that things could be better. On the longest night of the year, the winter solstice, the Stone Peak clan held a celebration. It was a subdued affair compared to what their traditions called for, but there was food and drink and singing in the orcish language that sounded strange and beautiful to Xavier's ears. Thraza invited him to sit beside her at the central fire, and her people brought them gifts: a carved wooden cup for Xavier, a new cloak for Thraza sewn by the clan's best seamstress. "Among my people," Thraza said quietly as the celebration continued around them, "the winter solstice is a time for new beginnings, for making oaths and commitments that will carry us through the dark months ahead." She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Xavier Everhart, you have given my people shelter when we had none. You have given me your heart when I thought I had lost the right to anyone's affection. I want to make you an oath." Xavier's heart raced. "What kind of oath?" "Among orcs, when two people wish to commit to each other, they make a solstice oath. It is not quite like human marriage, but it is similar. It is a promise to stand together, to protect each other, to share burdens and joys." Her amber eyes were intense in the firelight. "I want to make that oath with you if you will have it. I want the world to know that you are mine and I am yours." Xavier felt tears prick his eyes. This fierce, brave orc woman wanted to bind her life to his, despite all the dangers and complications. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I will make that oath with you." Thraza called for silence, and the celebration stilled. In the sudden quiet, she stood and pulled Xavier up with her, facing her people. "I, Thraza, daughter of Karg, leader of the Stone Peak clan, make my solstice oath before my people and the spirits of this mountain. I swear myself to Xavier Everhart, to stand with him in war and peace, in plenty and want, in joy and sorrow. His enemies are my enemies. His family is my family. His home is my home. This I swear by stone and sky, by blood and bone." Xavier took a breath, then spoke the words Thraza had taught him earlier, his pronunciation careful but sincere. "I, Xavier Everhart, owner of this mountain, make my solstice oath before the Stone Peak clan and the spirits of this land. I swear myself to Thraza, daughter of Karg, to stand with her in war and peace, in plenty and want, in joy and sorrow. Her enemies are my enemies. Her family is my family. Her home is my home. This I swear by heart and hand, by hope and honor." Thraza produced a knife and cut a small line across her palm, then did the same to Xavier's hand. They pressed their palms together, letting their blood mingle, and the orc clan erupted in cheers and ululating cries of celebration. Xavier felt overwhelmed, bound to this woman and her people by more than just words now. He was part of the Stone Peak clan, and they were part of him. That night, for the first time, he and Thraza made love in his cabin while the celebration continued outside. It was tender and careful, both of them mindful of her healing ribs and the newness of this intimacy between their kinds. But it was also passionate and real, a physical expression of the bond they had already forged through trials and trust. Afterward, lying tangled together under warm furs, Xavier felt a contentment he had not known was possible. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you," Thraza murmured back, her arm tightening around him. "My human, my heart." The winter continued its slow progression, and life on the mountain found a new rhythm. Xavier was no longer just the landowner tolerating refugees. He was Thraza's mate, part of the clan, invited to council meetings and celebrations and the daily life of the orcs. He learned to cook their foods, to understand their jokes and customs, to see the world through their eyes. In turn, he taught them things he knew: how to read and write in common tongue, how to preserve food for longer storage, how to identify the best timber for building. Plans began to form for the spring. Xavier owned 500 acres, but he only actively used a fraction of that for his logging. There was ample space for the Stone Peak clan to build a permanent settlement, if they could find a way to make it legal. Thraza and Ragath and the other warriors began talking about hiring themselves out as guards or hunters, earning coin to purchase their own land adjacent to Xavier's. It would take years, but it was possible. They could build something lasting here. But in late February, as the first signs of spring began to show in melting snow and returning birds, disaster struck. A group of human hunters tracking a wounded elk stumbled onto the orc camp. Unlike the sympathetic sergeant, these hunters saw only monsters to be reported and possibly eliminated for bounty. They fled before anyone could stop them, and Xavier knew with sick certainty that this time there would be no mercy. "We have maybe 3 days before soldiers come," he said at the emergency council Thraza called. "Possibly less if the hunters spread word and someone decides to take action immediately. We need to decide what to do." "We fight," Ragath said immediately. "We are warriors. We can defend this ground." "Against how many soldiers?" Thraza countered. "Xavier said there is a full garrison in the lowland settlement. That is 200 men, possibly more. We are 16 warriors, maybe 20 if we count the older fighters and arm the strongest of the non-combatants. We would be slaughtered and our children would be killed or enslaved. Then we run," one of the other warriors said. "We pack what we can and head deeper into the mountains. And go where?" Thraza's voice was sharp with frustration. "We barely survived the journey here. The elders are still weak. We have children too young to travel fast. Winter is not fully over. We would lose people, maybe half the clan, trying to flee through the high mountains in late winter storms." Silence fell over the council. Xavier's mind raced through scenarios, trying to find some solution that did not end in death or disaster. Then an idea struck him, crazy and desperate but possibly their only chance. "What if we do not run or fight?" he said slowly. "What if we meet the soldiers with diplomacy instead?" Every eye turned to him. Thraza shook her head. "They will not negotiate with orcs. We are exiled. We have no legal standing." "But I do," Xavier said. "I am a citizen in good standing, a war veteran with an honorable discharge. I own this land legally." "What if I go to the garrison commander before the soldiers come here? What if I explain the situation, offer guarantees of peaceful behavior, maybe even offer to post bond or pay fines or whatever it takes to make this legal?" "They will arrest you," Thraza said flatly. "You admitted to breaking the law when the sergeant was here. If you go to the authorities, you hand them cause to imprison you and seize your land." "Maybe. Or maybe I can convince them that having a peaceful orc settlement here, far from any human towns, supervised by a trusted veteran, is better than the alternative of driving you out to become someone else's problem or raiders." Xavier looked around the circle of orc faces. "I know it is a risk. I know it might fail, but it is the only plan I can think of that has a chance of ending without bloodshed." Ragath snorted. "It is a human solution, trust in words and laws and hope for mercy." "Do you have a better idea?" Xavier challenged. "Because I am listening if you do." No one spoke. Finally, Thraza stood and placed her hand on Xavier's shoulder. "If you do this, if you go to the garrison, you do it as my mate and as a representative of the Stone Peak clan. We stand behind you. If you are arrested, we will not abandon you." "I know," Xavier said, covering her hand with his. "I trust you, just as I am asking the garrison to trust us." He left at dawn the next morning, pushing hard through the snowy trails to reach the lowland settlement. It was a 2-day journey that he made in a day and a half, arriving exhausted at the garrison gates just before dark. The guards were suspicious, but let him in when he identified himself, and demanded to speak with the garrison commander. Commander Breslin was a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and the bearing of a career soldier. She received Xavier in her office, listened to his explanation without interruption, and then sat back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "You are asking me to officially sanction an orc settlement in the territories," she said. "Do you understand what you are requesting? The political complications, the precedent it would set." "I understand it is complicated," Xavier said carefully. "But I also know that the alternative is worse. If you send soldiers to drive them out, they will either die in the mountains or become desperate enough to turn to raiding to survive. Either way, you create a problem. But if you allow them to settle legally, supervised and monitored, you turn potential enemies into peaceful residents who contribute to the stability of the region." "Interesting argument," Breslin said. "Tell me about Thraza, daughter of Karg." The sergeant's report mentioned her. "Is she truly as capable a leader as her father?" "She is everything her father was and more," Xavier said with absolute conviction. "She is honorable, intelligent, and completely committed to keeping her people safe and out of trouble. She could have raided settlements to survive, but she chose hardship and flight instead. That tells you everything you need to know about her character." Breslin studied him. "You are in love with her." It was not a question. Xavier met her gaze steadily. "Yes. We made our oaths at the winter solstice. She is my mate by orc custom, and I will stand by her regardless of what you decide here." "That complicates things further," Breslin said, but her tone was not unsympathetic. "Very well, Xavier Everhart. I will make you a counter-offer. I cannot give you official legal sanction for an orc settlement that would require approval from the territorial governor, which I doubt you would get. But I can offer you a temporary arrangement. The Stone Peak clan will be classified as indentured laborers working your land. You will be responsible for their behavior and any damages they cause. They will be required to report to my garrison quarterly to verify that they are not engaging in illegal activities. In exchange, they can remain on your mountain without fear of forced removal." Xavier's mind worked through the implications. It was not perfect, but it was far better than he had hoped for. And if there are problems, if someone accuses them of crimes, then they will be investigated like any other residents with due process. Breslin leaned forward. "I am taking a significant risk here, Xavier. If the Stone Peak clan causes trouble, it ends my career. But I believe in second chances, and I believe that the way we treat the orcs defines who we are as humans. Your orc woman's father saved many human lives in his time. I will honor that by giving his daughter and her people a chance to prove themselves." Relief flooded through Xavier. "Thank you, Commander. You will not regret this." "I hope not," Breslin said dryly. She produced papers and had Xavier sign several documents establishing the legal framework. "Take these back to your mountain. And Xavier, keep your orcs out of sight as much as possible. The more invisible they are, the less trouble people can make for all of us." Xavier returned to his mountain carrying the precious documents, his heart light despite his exhaustion. When he arrived at the cabin, the entire Stone Peak clan gathered to hear the news. Thraza read the papers slowly, her expression moving from disbelief to cautious hope. "This is real," she said finally. "We can stay. Legally, we are safe." The celebration that night rivaled the winter solstice, and Xavier found himself embraced by orcs who thanked him in their language and in broken common tongue. Ragath, who had been so suspicious at first, clasped his arm in the warrior's grip and said simply, "You have proved yourself human. You are truly one of us." Spring came to the mountain with rushing streams and greening trees. The Stone Peak clan began building permanent structures, proper cabins with stone foundations that would last for generations. Xavier taught them his logging techniques, and they began carefully harvesting timber to sell, establishing legitimate trade relationships with merchants who were willing to deal with orcs if it meant good wood at fair prices. Thraza proved to be not just a warrior leader but a skilled diplomat and organizer. She negotiated contracts, settled disputes, and slowly began building relationships with nearby human settlements. It was delicate work, and there were setbacks: traders who refused to deal with orcs, incidents of prejudice and insult. A near riot when several young orc males visited a human town and were attacked by drunken locals. But Thraza handled each crisis with patience and determination, proving again and again that the Stone Peak clan could be trusted. Xavier and Thraza's own relationship continued to deepen and mature. They learned each other's languages, shared traditions, and blended their lives in ways that felt natural despite the strangeness of their different origins. Xavier taught Thraza to read complex texts, opening up worlds of human history and philosophy. Thraza taught Xavier the rich oral traditions of her people, epic poems and hero stories that stretched back centuries. In late spring, Thraza realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. A child of two species, human and orc, no one knew quite what that would mean. But when their daughter was born in early winter, healthy and squalling, she was perfect. She had Xavier's brown hair and Thraza's green-tinged skin, tiny tusks just beginning to show, and amber eyes that looked at the world with fierce curiosity. "What shall we name her?" Thraza asked, exhausted but radiant as she held the baby. Xavier thought of everything they had been through, all the challenges they had overcome to build this life. "Hope," he said, "because she is our hope for a future where humans and orcs can live together in peace." "Hope," Thraza repeated, smiling. "Yes, that is perfect." The child's birth transformed the Stone Peak clan's status in subtle ways. Merchants who came to trade wanted to see the half-orc baby and found her charming rather than frightening. Nearby farmers who had been suspicious began to soften, seeing the orcs not as monsters but as parents and families not so different from themselves. Commander Breslin visited personally and held the baby with surprising gentleness, declaring her the most beautiful child she had seen in years. By the time Hope was 2 years old, walking and talking in a mixture of orcish and common tongue, the Stone Peak clan had become an established part of the mountain community. They had purchased adjacent land with their earnings from logging and hunting, expanding their settlement. Several of the younger warriors had married, one to another orc from a different clan who heard of the safe haven and traveled to join them, another to a human woman from the nearby settlement who did not care what others thought. Xavier stood on the porch of the cabin he and Thraza now shared, watching Hope play with other orc children in the yard. Thraza came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her chin on his shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up your solitude, taking on all these complications?" Xavier turned in her embrace, looking into her amber eyes that had become more precious to him than anything in the world. "Not for a single moment. You and Hope and the clan, you are the best things that ever happened to me. This is what I was looking for when I came to this mountain, even if I did not know it then. Purpose, family, love. I love you, my human," Thraza said, kissing him gently. "Thank you for seeing us, for giving us a chance when no one else would." "Thank you for trusting me," Xavier replied. "For believing that not all humans are your enemy." They stood together in the evening light, watching their daughter play and listening to the sounds of the orc clan going about their evening routines. It was not the life Xavier had imagined when he bought this mountain, but it was infinitely richer. He had found his family in the most unexpected place, and had helped build something precious, a community where humans and orcs could live together, not in mere tolerance, but in genuine respect and love. Word of the Stone Peak clan's success spread slowly through the territories. Other displaced orc clans began to inquire about settling nearby, seeking the same safety and acceptance. Xavier and Thraza worked with Commander Breslin to establish guidelines and protocols, creating a framework that might, eventually, allow more integration between the species. It was slow work, and there were opponents at every turn: humans who saw all orcs as enemies, orcs who saw cooperation with humans as betrayal. But Xavier and Thraza had something powerful on their side. They were living proof that the animosity between their peoples was not inevitable, that love and trust could bridge any divide if people chose courage over fear. On Hope's 3rd birthday, the Stone Peak clan held a celebration that drew visitors from multiple settlements, human and orc alike. Xavier watched his daughter laugh as she played with children of both species, and saw in her the future he and Thraza were building. A future where the old hatreds might finally begin to heal. Ragath approached him during the celebration, offering him a cup of the clan's traditional honey mead. The warrior had become a close friend over the years, his initial suspicion long since transformed to genuine respect and affection. "I was wrong about you," Ragath said simply. "When you first came to our camp, when you first began courting Thraza, I thought you would fail us eventually. All humans did, in my experience, but you have proved more loyal than many orcs I have known. You have given us not just survival, but a true home. For that, you have my eternal gratitude." Xavier clasped the warrior's arm. "You gave me a home too, Ragath. Your trust, even when it was hard. Your acceptance of an outsider into your clan, that is a gift beyond measure." "You are not an outsider anymore," Ragath said with a fierce smile. "You are Stone Peak clan, our brother, our family." As the celebration continued around them, Xavier found Thraza and pulled her close. She leaned into him, both of them watching Hope dance with the other children, her laughter ringing out clear and joyful. "We did it," Thraza murmured. "We built something good here, something lasting." "We did," Xavier agreed. "And we will keep building it day by day, for as long as we have breath." "Together," Thraza said. "Together," Xavier echoed and kissed his orc mate while their daughter played and their clan celebrated, and the mountain that had brought them all together looked on in silent approval. The years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and new triumphs. Hope grew into a remarkable child, bright and curious, equally comfortable in human settlements and orc traditions. She became a living bridge between the two peoples, her very existence proving that cooperation and love were possible. Other half-orc children were born in the clan and in nearby settlements, a new generation that knew nothing of the old hatreds. Xavier's logging business expanded, employing both humans and orcs, showing that the two species could work side by side profitably and peacefully. Thraza became a recognized leader not just of her clan, but of a growing coalition of orc settlements that looked to her for wisdom and guidance. She traveled regularly to meet with human authorities and orc chieftains, always advocating for peace and integration, always holding up the Stone Peak clan as proof that a better way was possible. But for all their public roles and responsibilities, Xavier's favorite moments remained the quiet ones. Evenings on the porch with Thraza, watching the sun set over their mountain, teaching Hope to read or track or swing an axe, sitting around the fire with clan members, sharing stories and laughter. These were the moments that reminded him why he had fought so hard to build this life. One evening, when Hope was 10 years old and asking complicated questions about why some humans still feared orcs and some orcs still hated humans, Xavier found himself telling her the story of how he and Thraza had met. About the lumberjack who found an orc camp hidden on his mountain, and the leader who said they thought no one owned the land. about the choice he had made to see people instead of monsters, and the orc woman who had chosen to trust him in return. "So you saved us?" Hope asked, her amber eyes wide. "No," Thraza said, joining them on the porch and ruffling her daughter's hair. "We saved each other. That is what love does, little one. It does not see saving and being saved. It sees only walking the path together, whatever comes." Xavier reached out and took Thraza's hand, their fingers interlacing as naturally as breathing. After more than a decade together, the sight of her still made his heart skip. The fierce warrior who had become his partner, his mate, his home. "Will there ever be peace?" Hope asked softly. "Real peace, where no one is afraid, I do not know," Xavier said honestly. "But your mother and I have spent our lives trying to build that peace, one day at a time, one relationship at a time. And you, my brilliant daughter, will continue that work. You and all the children like you, who belong to both worlds and can help them understand each other." "That is a big responsibility," Hope said, but she sounded more excited than daunted. "Yes," Thraza agreed, "but you come from strong stock, human and orc alike. You can handle it." They sat together as darkness fell over the mountain, the lights of the clan settlement twinkling in the distance, and Xavier felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. From lonely soldier to lumberjack, to mate of an orc chieftain and father to an extraordinary child, it had been a journey beyond anything he could have imagined. But every step had been worth it. The mountain stood eternal around them, witness to all they had built and all they would continue to build. Xavier Everhart had claimed this land seeking solitude and peace. Instead, he had found family, purpose, and a love that transcended every boundary the world tried to impose. And that, he thought as Thraza leaned her head on his shoulder, and Hope chattered about her plans to visit the human settlement school and teach the children there about orc culture, was the greatest gift any man could receive. The story of the lumberjack and the orc clan hidden on his mountain had become local legend, told and retold in both human and orc communities. But for Xavier and Thraza, it was simply their life complicated, beautiful, and utterly real. They had taken a moment of potential conflict and transformed it into something precious. They had chosen love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. And in doing so, they had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The mountain that Xavier had purchased seeking isolation had become a beacon of what was possible when people dared to see past their differences to the common humanity or common personhood beneath. As the stars emerged overhead and Hope finally ran out of questions and fell asleep between her parents, Xavier and Thraza sat in comfortable silence, hands still joined, hearts still bound by the oaths they had made on that long-ago winter solstice. They had weathered every storm together, and would weather whatever came next the same way. Together, human and orc, bridging the gap one day at a time, building a future where their daughter and all children could live without fear of who they were or who they loved. It was not perfect. The world still held prejudice and hatred and challenges. But here, on this mountain, surrounded by the clan that had become family and the love that had become their foundation, Xavier and Thraza had created something rare and precious. A place where the old divisions did not matter, where people were judged by their character and their choices, not by the color of their skin or the shape of their tusks. The mountain had brought them together, and the mountain would shelter them and their descendants for generations to come. And in quiet moments like this, with his mate beside him and his daughter sleeping peacefully, Xavier knew with absolute certainty that he had found exactly what he had been searching for all along. Not solitude, but belonging. Not peace through isolation, but peace through connection. Not a life lived alone, but a life lived fully, surrounded by love. The lumberjack and the orc chieftain, two people from worlds that should have remained forever separate, had instead built a bridge between those worlds. And that bridge, strengthened by love and trust and unwavering commitment, would stand long after they were gone, a testament to what was possible when people chose hope over fear. This was their legacy. This was their triumph. This was their happily ever after, earned through courage and risk, and the simple revolutionary act of seeing each other as people worthy of love. And as Xavier held his family close under the starlight, he knew he would not change a single thing about the journey that had brought him here. The mountain was no longer his alone. It belonged to the Stone Peak clan, to his daughter, to the future they were building together. And that was exactly as it should be.